Hello and welcome to the Sunday, 17th August edition of A Proud Malcontent. I'm Pete Bell and I am a proud malcontent. Right, what are we doing today? Later on, Stephen Duncan will be back with us and he'll be taking a look at some of the figures. He'll be number crunching. Another myth another myth around the constitutional issue. And today and I think for probably the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at the matter of the franchise for a constitutional referendum, what the franchise was in 2014 and what it might be in the future, what will work. And Stephen has done a lot of number crunching on this. So we think it's actually going to spread over two and possibly three shows. So that's something to keep you interested for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Tell all your friends. Announcements. I am closing down my WordPress blog. Up until for the last few months, I've been running two blog sites. WordPress, which I've had for many years. I was originally on Blogspot, the Google thing, but it hasn't developed at all over the years. I went to WordPress, used that for many years, and then a couple of months ago, I started using Substack, and I was kind of testing the two, but I ended up using the two all the time. So it was a lot of extra work posting articles to both. So at some point, I had to make the decision, and I've opted to go with Substack because Substack has certain advantages. It means I will lose certain things. And the one thing that people have been unhappy about is that in order to comment on articles, you have to register with Substack. But it's simply a case of registering for a newsletter. You just get the articles notified of the articles by email. There's no need to pay. I'm not interested in monetizing the site. I welcome donations, obviously, but I really am not interested in monetizing. But it doesn't cost anything to register for the newsletter. That's the main point. So I'm hoping we'll still get comments. On WordPress, anybody could come in and comment, but they might be held in a moderation queue, but anybody could come in and comment. It's a bit different on Substack. However, on balance, I think Substack is going to be better. So that's what I'm going with. The WordPress site will close down on the 14th of September. The subscription ends on 14th of September. The site will remain, and all the content will remain as an archive, but the domain peterabell.scot will from that date and possibly earlier point to the Substack blog site. Okay, more than enough about that, I would say. Right, what's the subject of today's malcontent? I was looking at what's in and what's out, what's in the news and what's out. I look at the National on the days when I'm doing the show. I look at the National every day, but on the days when I'm doing the show, I look at the National to see if there's something worth talking about. And what I noticed right away was the lack of anything on the National front page online, the lack of anything about Scottish politics, really, and the constitutional issue in particular. There's nothing, absolutely nothing. What has dominated the news of late has been Nicola Sturgeon and her bloody autobiography, her much hyped autobiography. And I've read a couple of articles on that. They're mostly articles complaining about it or criticising it very heavily. But the best one, by far the best one that I've read, is from Robin McAlpine. Not the first time that it would be a Robin McAlpine article that I've chosen. And Robin tells us why I won't be reading Nicola Sturgeon's book. And I thought, well, it'll be interesting to find out his reasons and compare them with my own. I won't be reading it mainly because I just am not interested. I have no interest at all. But I was interested to see what Robin had to say, and as I've highlighted a few passages, he does a very, very good critique of political autobiographies, especially what he calls the rapid autobiography. His article is worth reading for that. But I picked out one comment on that subject. He says, rapid political autobiographies are without fail manipulative and a distraction. They are always obsessed with litigating the legacy of the politician concerned. I reckon that a couple of sentences there pretty well sums up all political autobiographies. And as soon as I saw the word manipulative, I thought of Nicola Sturgeon. And when I saw the word distraction, I thought of Nicola Sturgeon's book. It's all talking about the past. It's about the past. And, the past is the past. You learn the lessons and then you move on. We're not finding it easy to move on from Nicola Sturgeon. I could say a lot more on that, but not at the moment. The next highlighted comment I have from Robin is in Scotland, we're stuck in a constitutional impasse. Worse, there doesn't seem to be a single political party in Scotland capable of generating a convincing, never mind inspiring, new generation of leaders. At the moment, the future doesn't look great. Well, one way that Robin and McAlpine and I will generally be in agreement is a rather cynical and pessimistic view of the future of Scotland's cause. There really is no reason to be positive about it. People tell me that I should be more positive about it, but when I ask for a reason to be positive, the only reason they can give me is that being positive is better. Well, sorry, that's not good. I need a reason to be positive. I need something to be positive about. And at the moment, the future doesn't look great. And that is a simple fact. The future doesn't look great. People who are still talking about us being on the route to independence, independence just being round the corner, and independence being inevitable, they're deluded. They're fooling themselves. They're not fooling anybody who's actually looking at the reality of the situation. The future doesn't look great at the moment. Something drastic has to change for the future to look anything other than dismal. And part of that might be a new generation of leaders, because we sure as hell don't have any leadership at the moment. Scotland's cause has no leadership at the moment. Nobody is leading Scotland's cause, and nobody is being inspiring about it. And what struck me about the front page of the National today was that if I was given to conspiracy theories, I would have looked at the absence of anything about the constitutional issue, and I would have said to myself, this is the National helping out the SNP, helping out John Swinney by damping down the discussion, this discourse around the constitutional issue. I'm absolutely certain that John Swinney and his colleagues would much prefer to talk about pretty much anything else rather than the constitutional issue, about which they have nothing of value to say. Absolutely nothing. Next, from Robin's article, this is towards the end of the article. With Sturgeon, the facts you choose to look at will define your opinion. I think that's pretty much true about everything, Robin. If it is electoral success that you're looking at, she was pretty impressive. If it was what was done with the power that resulted, she really wasn't. That, as often happens, Robin has summed things up very nicely there. Sturgeon was impressive in many ways. I've often referred admiringly to her communication skills, and she was certainly manipulative. And from the stories we hear behind the scenes, she was rather more than manipulative, shall we say. Controlling might be a better word. But if it's what was done with the power that resulted, she really wasn't impressive at all, because nothing was done. Absolutely nothing. As far as the constitutional issue is concerned, and remember, that is always what I'm focused on. You can point to certain things that Sturgeon did, which are fine, but on the constitutional issue, she did nothing. Robin goes on, I am a power for purpose kind of person, and for that reason, I have long viewed the Sturgeon era as a criminally wasted opportunity. You may feel differently, but you'd be wrong. It was a criminally wasted opportunity. When I think back to 2015 and the potential that was there in 2015, and how that potential was squandered, how the momentum that we have then was squandered. I get very angry. I get quite angry. As I say, you may feel differently. People like to divert from the wasted opportunity and point to things like Sturgeon's performance during the COVID crisis, which admittedly was fairly impressive. But as far as the constitutional issue is concerned, nobody can point to a single thing that she did other than make empty promises. And now I think it's time for us to introduce Stephen Duncan. Stephen, are you there?
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Stephen. Welcome. I don't know if you've been listening. I don't know if you've been listening to me ranting, but I'm fairly sure that the viewers and listeners would much rather to hear what you have to say, and perhaps you could just do a quick run through of what it is that you'll be looking at today, and I think next week and perhaps the week after as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it's I'm really looking at three things, but they're all linked. And today will be the first part of that. What I'm going to try and establish is what probably didn't happen in 2014 with regard to the voting patterns of different groups, namely people that were born in Scotland, people that were born in the rest of the United Kingdom, and people that were born outside the United Kingdom. And you know, what actually did happen in 2014.
Can I just say this is dealing with the claim that Scots actually voted yes, and that the no vote was the result of what we shall, for the purposes of discussion, refer to as non-Scots These are very tricky terms at times, but for the purposes of discussion, we'll say non-Scots. It was non-Scots that actually produced the no vote. That Scots that is the claim that you're dealing with.
That's very clear. That's exactly right. And I've characterised this particular presentation as "we was robbed," to sort of stress that point. We can maybe, if we put the slides up, we can start sort of going through them. There will be a series of numbers and a little bit of number crunching as we go through this. So Peter, just stop me at any time if I'm not explaining anything clearly or need me to go back over something. Quite happy to do that, or leave it to the end, or both, whichever seems appropriate at the time. So as you said, this is part one of looking at the franchise. In this case, the claim that we would have voted. The Scots-born people born in this country voted yes, and we were denied our destiny by those that were born elsewhere but had a vote in the referendum of 2014. So maybe we can look at slide 2 now. Okay, there's the claim, and you'll all have seen it. There's been numerous assertions in various blogs and elsewhere on social media over the last decade that the Scots voted yes, and basically there in most cases, if there's a reference made, it's made to something called the Scottish Referendum Study. And that was produced in 2015, of which there are 2 reports. And I've mentioned them there. The first one was a presentation given on the 27th of March by Ailsa Henderson and James Mitchell of Edinburgh University in a series of lectures given at the university. I can't remember exactly what they were called, but there was a group of lectures on this subject and other subjects based on the SRS, and they mentioned in that that the yes vote for people born in Scotland was 52.7% in favour, so a majority in favour. If you fast forward 6 months. So that was 6 months after the referendum took place. Fast forward another 6 months to the first anniversary of the referendum, and Douglas Fraser, the BBC business and economy editor, produced a report, which is still up on the BBC website, which again used as attributed the source of his report to the SRS, which stated that the yes vote was 50.2%. So it was a bit lower, 2.5% lower than what had originally been published. Now, no, you don't actually see anybody ever referencing that in their blogs or their claims or their assertions about what the Scots did in 2014. Scots being Scottish-born residents. So already, if you have any margin for error, as you do have in sample surveys, that result already tells you it's inclusive. If it's known, it's inconclusive. It generally, depending on the size of the sample, the sort of margin for error could be somewhere between 1% and 3% either side of that 50%. So already you're allowing for the possibility of it being of the Scots voting no. Now, hopefully that makes sense up to that point. The Scottish election, a group called the Scottish Election Study, ran the SRS. By the way, I found all this out just by searching the internet. All this information is on the internet, but you have to look quite thoroughly to find it. Be quite dogged about it. The SES on their own website describe themselves as, and I'm quoting directly here, is a detailed independent study of politics and elections in Scotland, funded by the UKRI Economic and Social Research Council. The Economic and Social Research Council is itself apparently the UK's largest funder of economic and social, behavioural and human data science, and it itself is part of the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Group, which is a non-departmental public body sponsored by the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So in other words, it's a government quangle. And the SES itself, which carried out the SRS, has Ailsa Henderson as a team member of the group. So that's the sort of general background. And I should say that on the key findings summary that the SES produced some years later in 2018, they quoted the 50% figure for Scots-born residents in the referendum as being what actually happened. So that is already suggesting that the original 53% claim that people generally reference in support of the fact that Scots voted yes in 2014 is already under pressure, and it's under pressure from the publishers and owners of the SRS itself. So we move on to the next slide. Okay, so what I've tried to do is to check out the actual data that was used in the two reports. The reason why I'm doing that is that it's not actually published in the reports what the volumes of what the different numbers of in the sample that were comprised the three different cohorts of those people that were born in Scotland, those people born in the rest of the UK, and those people born elsewhere. So this is what I found. So for the first report, which was called the Scottish Question 6 months on, it was published 27th of March 2015. There are three different collection periods. You'll see the first wave, we call them waves. There's 4,849 people employed in that data gathering exercise. And if you check the collection period there, you'll see that it's in the 2 or 3 weeks running up to and just prior to the referendum. So one would assume that these would not have been included in the assessment of how people voted, since it was supposed to be a retrospective, how did you actually vote, not how are you intending to vote. So you should be able to assume that they were excluded. The second wave of data apparently was collected across 2 different surveys. It doesn't say what they are. And they were in the sort of 4 or 5 days after the referendum, 3,719 respondents to that. And the third wave there was no data shown at all in the presentation that Ailsa Henderson and James Mitchell gave, presumably because it was not gathered yet and it was going to be at some point in March 2015. So that's the data from the first report. From this, moving forward to 6 months to what Douglas Fraser produced or reported on. He didn't produce it. I found another set of information on something called the 2014 Scottish Referendum Study Codebook, which was published in 2018, again by Ailsa Henderson and James Mitchell, the author of the first report. And it gives you the breakdown of the numbers, which must be sort of the final numbers, given it was a few years later. There's obviously been some work done on these figures, but it's quite difficult to to sort of really understand exactly what. So again, we can discount the first wave there, 4,849, although the collection period does run 2 days after the referendum. It's a different date period from the first time, which is a bit confusing from the first sort of table. The second wave is made up of 3 different groupings, 2 of which were used or would appear to have been used in the SRS. You can see that if you look at the date periods they're 26th of September through to the 9th of October. So you would assume that these were included in the analysis that was carried out and reported on. Taken together, that represents 2,540 respondents. BSIP, by the way, which is it's one of the names of the surveys, is actually refers to the British Election Study Internet Panel. So some data was presumably used from that for the purposes of establishing who voted which way and by which sort of subcategory in 2014. And then there's the third wave there you can see that the collection period for that is about a year later, a year after the referendum took place, 12 to 13 months, 2,600 and, I can make it out correctly, 2,610. So if you add these 3 numbers in green together, you get a total of 5,150 respondents. And the importance of that is that in Douglas Fraser's report, he mentioned that there were around 5,000 Scots. What he meant by Scots here was residents in Scotland that were involved in the assessment. But he also said that was the assessment was carried out soon after the referendum date, so not 12 or 13 months after the referendum date, which casts some kind of doubt on whether the 2,610 respondents were actually included in the sample survey. Now, you can probably see from all that what I've just said there's a lot of inconsistencies and confusion, to me anyway, as to what volumes and what collection periods were used, and there's certainly a lack of clarity around the data collection. We don't know, for example, in all these different collection periods, waves 1, 2, and 3, whether the respondents in there were mutually exclusive, or whether there was some overlap between the different waves. We just don't know. I've assumed that they were mutually exclusive, but I'm guessing it's. I'm just trying to point out it's just a bit confusing, and it's you know the data, how it's set up, and the timestamps used, and it's maybe a bit difficult to use that to base without knowing more, to base a sort of statistical assessment on. The other thing to bear in mind is that I think I've mentioned before is you can't tie these volumes back to any of the reports, because the reports only show the percentages only of who voted yes and no. It doesn't tell you the volumes, so you can't confirm absolutely from these tables which numbers were involved where, and that has some impact later on. Is that okay so far?
Yeah, the impression I'm getting quite clearly is that there's a considerable amount of vagueness, confusion, dubiety even about the numbers here. And I think that's important, because when the claims are made about Scots having voted yes, that is a very emphatic claim. It's as if there's absolutely no doubt about it. And even without going into any deeper, you've already shown immediately that there is some question about it. Was it 53%? Was it 50.2%? Does it matter because there's a plus or minus 3 point margin of error? So we're still back to that hovering around the 50% mark. It's not nearly as clear cut as some would have us believe. I think that's the important point that comes out of it so far. So shall we go back to the slides?
Yes, that's great. Yeah, no, you've summarised that pretty well. That's exactly how I would do it if I could. So the next slide then. So that's the data. If we can move on to the next one, Peter, when you're ready.
I think there's a slight delay with the slides.
Okay.
Before they show up on your screen. That's the reason for the pause. I am clicking, honestly.
Okay. All right. That's great. Okay, fine. So now we've looked at the data. Now we'll look at trying to test the analysis. So, given what I've said about the data, what I've done is taken what I've called the most bullish scenario there. So that let's assume that it is 53%, 52.7%, and the sample size was a large one, 5,150. Most sample sizes, just as an aside, as you probably know, are just over 1,000 when the opinion polls. And the reason for that is that they generally all have a plus or minus 3% tolerance, if you like, or confidence interval, they call it. In that, if they make an estimate, you can say plus or minus 3%, they'd be 95% confident that they're somewhere in the ballpark, or that somewhere in that interval, you'll have that estimate will actually be have occurred in the population. So there's the different cohorts. I'll just run through these numbers and tables quite slowly, if I may. So for Scottish born or born in Scotland, the sample yes vote was 52.7% according to the SRS. In the rest of the UK, that was 27.9%, and outside of the UK, it was 42.9%. Now, if we assumed for the minute that those three different categories or cohorts turned out in the referendum in the same proportions that they represented the population, and the population being the census of 2011, you would expect 83% Scots born, 9% the rest of the UK, and 8% those born outside the UK. You can use these numbers to get an implied actual referendum result for 2014. So if the sample is accurate, and if people turned out that in the same proportions as they represent the population, you can come up with an implied overall yes percentage in the referendum. So you can do that by multiplying these two percentages together. So, and then summing up. So what I mean by that is you take the Scottish sample, yes, 52.7%, multiply that by 83.32% in the adjacent column, you'll get a total of 43.9%. So that's the contribution or weighted sample yes result for Scottish-born folks in the sample, and by extension in the referendum. If you do the same for the rest of the UK, you get a weighted result for 2.4% and 3.4% for outside the UK. Sum them all up, and you come to just under 50%, 49.76% in this table. So what that's saying is that if this it's saying if the sample is right, the yes vote is at 50%, just under 50% of the population. We know the actual result was 45% or just under 45%. So already we've got a bit of a question mark there about this sample and extending it to the population. The sample size is 5,150, so that means you should have a more precise result, and therefore you only require a narrower tolerance. So the sampling error in this case would be just under 1.5%, 1.4%. So that would give you a range around that estimate, the estimate of 49.76%, of 48.39% to 51.1%. Now, notice that interval doesn't include 44.7%, and it's not close to including 44.7%. It's an overestimate. So it's not allowing for that possibility. So again, there's a question mark around the accuracy of the sample estimates if the assumption of turnout representing the turnout by birthplace is the same as what these birthplaces represent in the population as a whole. Okay, so the next table, so that's the top table that I've just described. So there's some doubt around the accuracy of the of extending of these cohorts when you sort of weight it and then sum it up as a total. If, however, the SRS were to be accurate, that would imply that the voting by these different birthplace cohorts was quite considerably different from what the census is or was at that time. So I've calculated that if the SRS is for it to have been accurate, the turnout among Scottish-born residents would have to be around about 55%, not 83%, so 28% lower. And obviously, if that was the case, then the other two categories would have to be so much higher to get to 100% of the total electorate again. But what that implies is that those persons not born in Scotland would have represented just under 3 times the proportion that they represent in the population at large. So basically, you come to two possible outcomes on the basis of this. Either the estimate is accurate and is inaccurate rather, and the total vote in the Scottish-born yes vote is overstated, or the turnout amongst the Scots-born cohort is disproportionately low, and vice versa for the other non-Scottish cohorts, and the study is accurate. Do you want to stop there? Any questions on that one?
What I'm taking out of this is that there's certain aspects of this that don't accord with. I dislike the term common sense, but there are aspects of this that, for the want of a better term, don't accord with common sense, like turnout amongst. You were talking out there about turnout, and if I read you. Heard you correctly, you were saying that the figures suggest that turnout amongst Scots-born, turnout for the referendum, would, among the Scots-born, yes, 55%.
Yes.
Only 55% of Scottish-born people actually turned out for the referendum, as compared with, what was it, 84%,
yes.
The total turnout. There's something wrong there.
Yes.
That jars in my mind.
Because
common sense, using that term again, common sense would bid you assume that Scots-born, native Scots, for the want of a, the turnout would be higher amongst them.
Yes.
Am I hearing this correctly?
Well, you would, unless we know anything different, the assumption is that it would be in line roughly with the census. There's no reason, unless we have a reason to believe that, let's say, Scots-born are less inclined to vote on a national question as important as whether we're going to have independent statehood or whether we're going to have a union of some sort with another country. Why would is it likely? Is it plausible that people would turn out in much lower numbers if you're born here? You would think, if anything, you would think it would be the other way around, as you were saying. But at least it would be roughly around about the same proportion of the of what they represented in the population, unless, of course, that population includes people under the age of 16. But there's some kind of skew on it, for those, if you had to cut out the people under the age of 16 who didn't have a vote, then unless that proportion was somewhat different, as it could be, but I wouldn't have thought the weighting would have allowed it to be moved much from 83%, maybe 80%, maybe 84%. It wouldn't be much different. And also the census hasn't changed much in 10 years. I mean, the Scots born have consistently declined since 1991, but in the last census in 2022, it was just under 80%. So using 83% is probably not a bad guess, unless you have other information that I don't have that says turnout would be disproportionately lower among Scots born. You assume it would be the same. You have to assume.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem right. So again, we're looking at these figures and saying, there's something just doesn't add up here. When you get to the conclusion that 53% of Scots, there's a lot of information behind that just doesn't add up. That doesn't seem plausible. Yeah,
that's right. It's a sense check, really. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Or common sense check. So that, if you can move on to the next slide, Peter, which is the final one. So the conclusion on that claim that Scots born or Scottish were cheated by incomers who voted no is doubtful, I would say, and it's doubtful for these summarised reasons. There's lack of clarity around the data employed. As we've just mentioned, the results look to be pretty implausible, given A, the referendum result, and B, the composition of the population by place of birth. And it's quite difficult, I would suggest, to sort of base any inferences on the from the SRS about the voting patterns among these different cohorts, given that the foregoing. Now that doesn't mean so it's probably because if there is a problem with it, it will be to do with the way the sample's been designed, and the weightings within that sample will not be. It implies that the weightings are not representative of proportions in that sample, not representative of the population at large. So I would be very hesitant about drawing any conclusions, and certainly hard and fast ones that people seem to have done in a somewhat glib fashion. And I know it's 10 years old, this report, and it's not up on the web anymore, but people still hang on to it as some kind of comfort blanket and say, well, if only we had, if only Scots had voted, we would have been, we'd be independent by now. It's not. I wouldn't be able to draw that conclusion, far from it, on the basis of this.
I think this comes back to what I often talk about. That's safe assumptions and unsafe assumptions. That where you don't have hard facts or reasoned argument, the next best thing is safe assumptions. And you have to always ask if the assumptions being made are safe.
Yep.
And the assumption that 53% of native-born Scots voted yes does not appear to be a safe assumption. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's definitely my conclusion. And even the 53% is being undermined by the publishers of the SRS themselves. They said it's 50%, and it's still questionable. 50%.
Right. So why is that important? Obviously it's important because there's a fairly substantial section of the independence movement that's talking seriously about some kind of restricted franchise for a future referendum. And they're talking about restricting the franchise on the basis of this assumption, which from what you've done so far with the number crunching, does not appear to be a safe assumption.
Absolutely spot on. Couldn't put it better myself. No, I think we need to look at. I haven't completely finished this exercise yet, and the next part would look at, is there an alternative way of establishing what went on in 2014 for these different groupings? So I've had another look at that, and we can maybe take that up next time. And then after that, we can maybe look at what might happen in a future referendum, given the demographics of voting as they are now, rather than as they were in 2014.
Right. I'm careful about what I'm saying here because I don't want to get into stuff that we're going to cover in the next week or two. So I'm holding back. I'm holding back a bit on my comments about this. Others aren't holding back quite so much. Gird your loins, Stephen. Here we have a comment from George Brown, who says, "Where did you get this guy?" That's you, Stephen. It reminds me of Bitter Together. What was that? Is that 2 million, or is that 200,000? Yeah. 200,000 postal votes collectively collated and counted in that Scottish town of Carlisle. Come on, are we still that stupid? Well, I don't know, George. That's a relative term, and I really don't know what you're going on about here. Does it really matter where the postal votes are counted or who counts them? It's the accuracy of the count. And I happen to know that the way the postal votes were counted and checked, there were a lot of checks and balances there. This whole conspiracy theory around the count has never seemed very convincing to me, although obviously people take a lot of comfort from you. All I would say, George, is if you have better information than the information that Stephen has used, then please give us it, and we'll take a look at that. And I'm sure Stephen would take account of it in his future calculations. Yes? Right, and I'll thank you again, Stephen, for a very interesting presentation, somewhat intriguing presentation, and what I have no doubt will be a controversial presentation. Some of the conclusions that are emerging from this already will not suit a lot of people. So I prepare for a few more comments along the lines of the comment from George Brown there. For the moment, Stephen, I'll say thank you, and until next Sunday, goodbye.
Adios.
And now, where are we? We have about 10 minutes left, and I had one other item that I wanted to cover in this just before we finish today. When I said there was nothing on the front page of the National about the rather pressing, rather important constitutional issue, where you do find a lot on the constitutional issue is in the letters section, the community section of the National. And the argument that drew my attention in that the exchanges that I was reading recently over the past week was one. There was a letter from a chap called Haddo, which basically said that. Well, it's kind of summed up in this comment about it. There was another one from a guy called Ken Gow, and the basic premise of the whole thing is, as Alistair Potter says here, alternate strategies for achieving independence can exist alongside each other. There is no real reason to say only this strategy or the other strategy must be supported by everyone, or that we must lock ourselves into one proposal. And I have to say, not for the first time, Alistair's talking nonsense there, because there are things that work and things that don't work. And there are whatever proposal, whatever route you're proposing to independence, there are bound to be commonalities among all of them. So if there's one doesn't work for some reason, then it's likely that the others won't work for the same reason. And what I've suggested is that all of these supposed routes come up against this matter of legislative competence. They all come to that point eventually, ultimately. They all come to that point. So the idea that it doesn't matter which route you take, or that different routes can be tried at the same time, and if one works, if one doesn't work, you switch to another. It's a nonsense, because they're all going to come to the same point in the long run. The other claim that was made about this was the initial letter that I looked at referred to only two routes. The two routes, and the two routes referred to were John Swinney's Section 30 undertaking, his promise that a vote for the SNP is a vote for another Section 30 request. It's not a vote for independence, it's a vote for another Section 30 request. And the other was referring to what is supposedly the alternate route, which doesn't refer to a Section 30 request, but only refers to negotiations around independence, or negotiations for independence. That is the phrase used by Alapa. Negotiations around independence is the phrase used by one of the resolutions, branch resolutions being submitted for the SNP conference. But these aren't two different routes. They are not two different routes. They're the same thing. Because whether you actually come right out and say Section 30 request, or you say negotiations with Westminster, it comes to the same thing. Because the only thing that Westminster would conceivably negotiate is a Section 30 order. That's it. That's the only thing that they're ever going to give into. And probably not even to that. I said like 99% certain that they won't accede to that. So they are not alternate routes, and they don't go anywhere because they put Westminster front and centre and not the people of Scotland. They can't go anywhere. They come up against that Westminster block, and quite intentionally. They walk right into it. It's a wall. And both of these routes walk into that Westminster wall. The real alternative is to circumvent that wall altogether, just cut Westminster out of the thing. And there are references in some of these comments to there's two strategies that won't work. One is UDI, and the other is the just do it. Now, the just do it reference is, I suspect, to the thinking of Liberate Scotland, where their plan, as to the extent I've been able to extract any information about it, their plan simply goes, you elect a majority of Liberate Scotland MSPs, and then they just declare independence. Don't ask them how they do this. Don't ask them what about parliamentary procedure or anything. because their heads explode. They simply haven't a clue. They don't know anything about parliamentary procedure. They've never read the standing orders. They probably haven't read the Scotland Act. They really are just clueless. That's the just do it thing. And honestly, if you're taking that seriously, I have nothing polite to say to you. And then there's the UDI, which is discounted, but we know that it's not UDI, it's Scottish UDI. When people talk about UDI, well, I had one. I was very tempted to be rude to one person comparing Scotland, 21st century Scotland, to mid 20th century Rhodesia. Yeah, there is no comparison there. And it's this, they're falling back on this assumption that UDI is just the one thing, and it is Rhodesia. It's that, and it can't be anything else. And that is also nonsense. Every nation's constitutional circumstances are unique, and therefore their way of changing those constitutional circumstances will be particular to them. And if that way of changing it is by something termed a unilateral declaration of independence, which is actually any declaration of independence, they're all unilateral. If it's tailored to their circumstances, then it's unique because the circumstances are unique. And the reason that I refer to Scottish UDI and not just UDI is because I want to emphasize this fact that it is tailored particularly to Scotland. And it does work. It's explained that it does work. So if there's an alternative route, then that is it. It's Scottish UDI. And that works by addressing the issue of legislative competence and addressing it first. Because as there was something else that was said, somebody had said about the it all being about self-determination. And that is it. That is a fact. It is all about self-determination. Initially, it's not about independence. If we're going to use 2026 as a device to progress Scotland's cause, then we have to use it as a device to give us access to the exercise of our right of self-determination. And I'm talking there about legislative competence, so that the Scottish Parliament can actually legislate for a proper constitutional referendum. Now, none of these other supposed routes address that question of legislative competence. None of them do. And John Swinney certainly doesn't. John Swinney thinks that legislative competence for a proper constitutional referendum can be obtained by asking Westminster nicely for it. And that's just stupid. It's just stupid because Westminster cannot cannot devolve powers which supersede its own. Westminster, according to the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, Westminster must always have the final word. And a proper constitutional referendum gives Scotland the final word. So that is not going to happen. We're at the end of our time now. I'll be back on Wednesday. I, as ever, haven't a clue what the show will be about. But for the moment, I'll thank you for tuning in, and I will see you on Wednesday. Bye.